Hört. Festivals mit Ö1. Heute die Ars Electronica 2024.
Welcome to the Ö1 Festival podcast on the Ars Electronica 2024. The Festival for Art, Technology and Society will take place in Linz from September 4th to 8th and will be dedicated to the title Hope, Who Will Turn the Tide. Exhibitions, concerts, performances, screenings, conferences and workshops will be held at several locations in Linz, Austria. The main venue will once again be Post City, a former postal distribution centre at Linz Central Station. During these 5 days of the Ars Electronica Festival, artists, researchers, developers, activists and entrepreneurs from all over the world will take centre stage. In this podcast, we would like to introduce you to some of them. Welcome to the first episode of our series of talks, which we are starting today in Linz. There, my colleague Hannah Balber met Gerfried Stocker. He's a media artist and telecommunications engineer and has been artistic director and co-CEO of Ars Electronica since 1995.
Herr Stocker, Sie stecken ja jetzt gerade intensiv in den Vorbereitungen.
Herr Stocker, you are currently very busy preparing for this year's festival edition. Are you still nervous after all these years or have you already developed a routine?
Also zum Glück entwickelt sich natürlich eine Routine.
Luckily, you do develop a routine based on the fact that you get used to the stress that comes along with it. You simply realise more and more, and it's a fantastic thing for us that we have very long-term collaboration within our teams. We have the advantage that we don't have to build a completely new crew each year, as some festivals do. But we really do have people who have been working on these projects for years, sometimes even decades. That, of course, gives us stability, which not only allows us to approach everything more calmly, but also makes us more willing to take risks. And I think that's very important for a festival.
How did it all start out for you? How did you come to Ars Electronica and what fascinated you about it from the beginning?
My
very first contact with Ars Electronica was via the radio, when, in 1979, I heard that there was a festival in Linz to do with computers and electronics. And of course, that was something completely out of the ordinary. It really interested me. I can still remember that. And then in 1986, I travelled to Ars Electronica for the first time as a young, aspiring media artist. And that really was this life-changing situation. Seeing there that dealing with technology from an artistic point of view was not in fact something weird, but that there are many people from all over the world who make these great projects, who also win prizes, who stand on festival stages. Of course, that was also incredibly encouraging for me to go my own way. I won prizes and awards at the Prix Ars Electronica in the 90s. There was a relatively large international radio project in 95. So, radio is very important in my career at Ars Electronica. And the next step was the opportunity to take over the position of artistic director. At that time, the Ars Electronica Centre was still under construction, and it was actually a very decisive turning point for Ars Electronica, because up until then, there was only the festival once a year, and with the Ars Electronica Centre, much of what had always been discussed in the ideas and concepts surrounding Ars Electronica actually first became reality. That is, to implement the didactic, educational and emancipating aspect of new technologies in a museum. Not only to come together with the international hotshots of media art once a year, but also to work here in Linz for the city, for the population and with the population throughout the year. And that really has become a whole new era in the very long history of Ars Electronica.
Die diesjährige Festivalausgabe steht ja unter dem Motto Hope.
The title of this year's festival is Hope. What do you want to signal with this motto?
Es ist ein Titel oder ein Thema, das eigentlich sich aus den letzten
It's a theme that has solidified and imposed itself over the last few years. We've had a number of topics that are very strongly related to the major problems of our time. The erosion of democracy, the question of how opinions are formed in our globally networked society, of course, the big issues surrounding climate change and the necessary energy transition. And we have noticed, also in the projects submitted to us in the major international competitions, that more and more artists are setting themselves up on the path of actually opening up other perspectives with ideas, with projects, and of actually creating concrete proposals, concrete prototypes.
Das heißt, Hoffnung sozusagen nicht als, ja.
That means hope, so to speak, not as, yeah, I'll sit back and relax, I hope, let's see what happens. That's not the understanding of hope you're talking about.
Also Hoffnung nicht.
We've always phrased it like this, as hope not as the belief that things will somehow work out, but hope like trust in ourselves and in us as a community, as societies, that we can bring about change. And that is an incredibly active, proactive form of hope. The festival also intends to become a kind of fair, now in a positive sense, a festival of people who have already set out to change things.
Who will turn the tide? Under this motto, the Ars Electronica Festival wants to put the spotlight on people whose activities give cause for optimism. The focus is not on how the tide can be turned, but on who the driving forces behind it are. The festival programme is extremely dense. Several hundred different projects will be shown in just a few days, with well over 1,000 individual artists, speakers and activists performing. Several committees and juries determine what is shown. For example, there are various EU collaborations, a campus programme for international universities, and events, themed exhibitions and conferences put together by Ars Electronica and guest curators. A major highlight every year is the Prix Ars Electronica, which is considered the world's most traditional and prestigious media art competition. The Prix Ars Electronica exhibition can be seen this year at the Lentos Kunstmuseum and brings together outstanding submissions from the various categories. For the first time this year, there's a prize for AI in art.
Ja, wir haben natürlich KI als Thema seit vielen Jahren.
We have, of course, had AI as a theme for many years. In 2017, it was the main theme of the festival, but it was primarily more of an artistic work about AI, which has been at the core for years. The effects, the problems that can come with it, and so on. This year, 2024, there was, of course, this enormous breakthrough in text-to-picture, where you can create images from texts or generate complete video sequences from texts. And there was always the very superficial examination of this topic, where this belief prevails. So art and AI is someone presses a button and then the art jumps out of the computer, so to speak. Of course, that's complete rubbish. Art is always a process, a working process of artists. So this whole question of can AI make art, etc., is actually not admissible in this form. Art can only be created in a working process, in a thought process that has to be carried out by artists. Everything else is just interesting pictures, interesting videos, etc.
Und bei dem Thema Kunst und künstliche Intelligenz.
When it comes to art and artificial intelligence, the question is also, what does the prize actually recognize? Because you can say that the artwork comes from a generative AI or something of that sort, but the process behind it is done by a human.
Das ist zu vereinfacht gesagt.
That's a bit too simplistic. We think it's very important, and it will also play a major role at the festival, to really report more on artistic practices with AI. And then you realise very well that this reduction, that the artwork no longer exists as such because it comes from the computer, is not so clear and unambiguous. It's a bit like what was said at the beginning of photography. No, they're not pictures because someone didn't do it with a brush or a pencil. And it's also true, the picture jumps out of the camera. The picture used to be created in a chemical process, on a disk. Now it's created in a digital computer. But it's always about intention. Art and artistic works are inextricably linked. On the one hand with the process, of course, but also with an intention, with the formation of a will. And that was also the important thing. That's why we said we wanted to award a prize for this within the Prix this year, in order to draw attention to it. I think art really does have a socio-political task and position here to intervene on behalf of society in this development process in which AI is being developed, established and applied.
Künstliche Intelligenz ist eben ein wichtiges, großes Thema auch, das sich durch dieses Festival
So, artificial intelligence is an important theme that runs through this festival. What else? What are the central themes, questions, problems, or approaches to solutions that pervade this year's festival?
Das ist natürlich vor allem rund das ganz große Problem Klimawandel.
Primarily anything to do with the major problem of climate change. A second thematic strand that is very strongly represented is the question of democracy, the erosion of democracy, the formation of opinion in a world in which any information can be falsified and invented with the press of a button. And also, of course, major problems such as migration movements and how they are dealt with come up again and again. And I think you can see that art really does get caught up in the crossfire of current discussions. That's always something. Now, perhaps again on the subject of hope, hope also has something to do with courage. Without courage, there is no hope. And I believe that art really is something that can be encouraging in every aspect.
Wie hat sich eigentlich das Festival so in den letzten knapp 30
How has the
Jahren,
festival
seitdem Sie
changed over the last 30 years since you've been in charge? Insofar as this is also a period of time in which a lot changed regarding media and technology.
Wir haben natürlich einen Entwicklungsstrang in der Technologie, der wirklich fantastisch ist.
Of course, we have a strand of development in technology that's really fantastic. I remember the discussions we had at the beginning about using DVDs instead of VHS tapes to publicise the Computer Animation Award winners. Now it's not an issue at all, because before they even get an award, their videos are already available online worldwide. There is, of course, a huge development in many areas. What is somehow so interesting are, of course, these recurring cycles. For example, how often it has been said that virtual reality is now the big boom and will change the world. It has evolved, of course. We now have devices that are much better than in the early 90s, mid-90s. When it comes to the concepts of what you can do with them, it's sometimes pretty much the same. And in this long-term view, I always tend to focus much more on what hasn't changed. What hasn't changed is that we always tend to give technology far too much credit, that we always fall into this trap and talk about the technology as if technology were the driving factor, overlooking the fact that there is not a single piece of technology on the planet that was not made by us humans. What Ars Electronica has actually been about for 45 years is obviously a truly timeless theme. That is, the role and this very agency, the responsibility, the competence of humans having to constantly assert ourselves as individuals, having to test ourselves as societies to develop further. And I believe that it is also an important task of a festival to point out these connections. Perhaps we will learn something from history at some point.
Hoffnung, Hope ist eben das große Motto.
Hope is the overall motto, the title of the festival at a time when many people feel uncertain. What brings you hope these days?
Ja, ich habe diese wunderbar privilegierte Position.
I have this wonderfully privileged position of being able to work at a place like Ars Electronica and ultimately not only thinking about the possible negative effects of technological developments, but also on a daily basis being in contact with people and working with people who are doing the right thing. That is, seeing these developments from this perspective. What can it do for people? For me, one of the best examples that has always given me absolute hope, and which was perhaps also a motivation for choosing this topic, is this Japanese robot cafe, which received an award from us 2 years ago. Because when you hear robot cafe in Tokyo, you immediately think of Japan, where everything is done by robots and machines, and you immediately think of something that is actually devoid of people, alienated from human beings. In this robot cafe, the coffee is made and served by robots. But these robots are controlled live in real time by people who are unable to participate in working life and social life due to illness or other problems. They lie paralyzed in a bed and can control the robot with their eyes and an interface, which brings them back into the heart of society. This is a project that, on the one hand, has an extremely high level of technical virtuosity. It's fantastic what they've achieved logistically and technically. And on the other hand, it makes precisely this difference. Not replacing people, but supporting and helping people. And when you see that, you can't help but be an optimist yourself.
Dann kann man gar nicht anders, als selbst ein Optimist zu sein.
That was Gerfried Stocker in the Ö1 Festival Guide to Ars Electronica 2024. Thank you very much for listening. The next episode is all about eating earth. Masharu from the Netherlands has founded a Museum of Edible Earth and talks to Hannah Balber about their current project, Compost as Superfood.